On this episode of My Town, Indiana, we're going to visit what used to be the train depot of Aurora, Indiana. Hi Roy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine.
I hear you're the man to come to if you want to find out anything about the depot here in Aurora.
I'm the history and genealogy specialist at Aurora Library.
Yeah, that's good to hear because somebody told me about you. I said, well, we're going to get a little bit of information from you today. You seem to know a lot about this area. So could you tell me a little bit about the depot? This is a railroad depot, right?
This is the third depot on this site. The first one was built in about 1854. Very small depot like all the rest of them up and down the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad line. And in 1867, a new, larger one about the same size as this one was built, and that lasted till about 1915. And at that time, the commercial people in Aurora wanted a modern depot, meaning they wanted one with running water and a john for their patrons. And so this one was built in 1916 and survives today almost intact the way it was when it was finished.
Okay, a little bit about the background of this building. What's going on here?
Well, passenger service ceased coming out of this building in 1971 or 2, I believe. And that was the demise of the building as a bona fide railroad depot. After that time, it had been bought and sold several times and used for multiple businesses. About 2 years ago, the Aurora Public Library purchased the building, did some restoration on it, and made it an annex to Aurora Library, and calling it the Aurora Library History and Genealogy Depot. So now we have preserved this, and it's probably one of the nicest preserved railroad on the B&R Railroad to St. Louis. And we encourage people to come here because it's a nice atmosphere, it's friendly. We have talks here 8 times a year. We have 30 to 55 people here at the talk, and we learn about the history of Aurora. Okay, so Roy, who is this man here? Here today we have Mr. Lou Goebel, who comes in periodically with the little tidbits of Aurora, and today he's brought us a picture of his father who used to work in this same depot. And when did he live?
Dad started here January 1st, 1918. He lied about his age. He was only 16 years old. And at one time he was held up and locked down in the basement. So he worked for the B&O until 1932, I believe it was. Somebody came from St. Louis and bumped him. He worked here and he went to Osgood, and he was out there from September to Christmas, and the guy came from St. Louis and bumped him, so we moved back to Aurora, and that was the end of the railroad.
So how did he not get killed? I mean, how did he survive?
He hollered, and somebody came and left him out. So, but I can remember riding the trains when I was a little kid, and here's his Eagle dues. What was it? 75 cents.
75 cents.
75 cents for a year.
What do we have here, Roy? See, it looks like an opening in the floor.
Right here is where Mr. Goebel was put in after the robbery. And as we can see, this is a trap door in the depot going down to the basement.
I see. So your father was hurtled down there, or huddled down there?
Yeah.
And how many days was he down there?
Oh, he was just there for a while. It wasn't too long.
Okay.
But he hollered, and somebody came and left him out.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you know, life's not boring, so we like to hear stories like this.
There was a lot of traffic around here those days. You know, everybody rode the train.
And what was that like to be on the? Do you recall? What was the train like?
We would ride the train from here to Cincinnati all the time because my mother's folks lived in Covington, and so we would go up there. And if I remember correctly, we didn't have to pay for the train because Dad worked for the railroad. I think that's right. So.
That must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last person to ride the train and buy a ticket at the Aurora Depot was J.D. Mortz. His father worked on the railroad and made sure that J.D. got the last ticket. And we still have that ticket here at the depot now.
Well, now I'd like to see that.
The streetcar that Lou was talking about was called the CL&A line, and that meant Cincinnati, Lawrenceburg, and Aurora. And it started sometime right after the turn of the century, and it went out of business in about 1931, 1932, and because of the Depression, people weren't riding, and it just wasn't viable monetarily anymore. And what I understand, I found out about a year ago, that one, maybe two of the cars that was used on that line are now in Oklahoma. And they were sold to people in Oklahoma and used for a while, and I think one is part of a railroad museum.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
And this was the 1937 flood, you say, huh?
No, where were you living in 37?
On Lincoln Street.
Roy, the interior of this building, is it about the same as what it was in the beginning? Or?
It is probably 95% of what it looked like in 1917 when it was completed. When the library purchased this, about in 2011, they had to redo the ceiling, but it looks just like it did then. We have the lights up here that look brand new, but they're not. They're original to the building of the building. And when we had them refurbished, the man called down and said, "Did you know the lights are solid brass?"
Come on.
The wainscoting you see throughout the building in here is original wainscoting.
All this stuff over here, huh?
Yes. The window to the left is the original Ticketmaster's window when you bought the tickets.
Oh.
The one modification that was done was this building or this door on the right, the double door. That used to be a large window similar to the ticket window where you would put your luggage.
Roy, did freight come here, or what was this depot used for?
This depot was used for passenger service, and so the freight that went out of here was luggage.
Okay.
The actual freight, business freight, was down the track about 100 yards at the end of Ayler & Mill feed store, and they had a separate dock and a separate building there for commercial freight. There was also another railroad building here in Aurora down by the river, and it was part of the Big Four Railroad.
Oh, I see.
And the Big Four, that was generally a freight depot for commercial freight out of that office too. And the depot, that track ended in Aurora.
I see.
And the trailways.
Before World War II?
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Because when I went in the Navy, I caught a Greyhound bus and went to Cincinnati and enlisted up there.
And that was the end of the public transportation when the buses went out. Probably in the 70s, I imagine.
Yes.
So, and you had people in Cincinnati come in here to work? Is that what you were saying before?
Oh, more people went from here to Cincinnati.
Oh, I see.
And of course they could get off up there and get on a streetcar and go wherever they wanted, you know. But,
what was it like on the roads if you didn't take the railroad? What were the streets like? Because we have US 50 now.
just 2 lane, that's all.
Was it gravel or was it?
It was blacktop.
Blacktop.
As far as I remember, yeah.
So Roy, I take that this is a scene of the area like the lower US 50 and all that?
This is what we call Cochrane today. This drawing was made by a person who lived in Cochrane, and it was taken above Stewart Street, and it was a pencil drawing made in 1881. And what is interesting about this is the railroad shops. When the railroad came through here in 1854, George Cochran gave several acres to the railroad so they could put in engine repair shops, and they built railroad cars in Cochran. And they built cars in Cochran from 1854 until probably the 1880s, when everything was moved to Washington, Indiana. And that was basically kind of the demise of Cochran. This picture right here, there are still some existing buildings in this. This is the mansion on top of the hill, and Mr. Drury owns it right now. This is the schoolhouse that remains right now. This building right here remains on the corner of Indiana Avenue and the railroad. That was a hotel at one time. And Cochran was a neat little bustling town from 1867 until 1907, when they were absorbed by Aurora. I want to welcome anybody to the Aurora Library at the depot. You can come learn your genealogy. You can learn history of Aurora. We have, for a small town library, we have a lot of history here. We have high school yearbooks. We have history of the mayors. We have county histories. We have histories of adjoining counties. And we also have Ancestry, which is a genealogical program, and we are open here at Aurora Library on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 5, and the first Saturday of the month from 9 to 3. Stop in, we'll chat, and we'll have a little fun about Aurora.
Roy, is this the only depot that is around at this moment?
Lawrenceburg's depot is still there, right on the railroad tracks, and the Lawrenceburg Library has bought that depot also and made it part of their library. And that is a meeting room now. They have talks in there periodically. There's also one in Cleves North Bend, but I'm not sure how much of that one is original. But there's several more up and down the line, but I think the one here in Aurora is the most complete original depot.
Okay, and it's very beautiful too. I think the appearance, every time I come down here, I can't help but look at the depot. It gets my attention right off the bat.
It's a wonderful depot. It's kind of a welcome center for when you come into Aurora. When you see the depot, you know you're in Aurora.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. You know, you are a man of history, and I was going to conclude this episode of My Town, but is it okay for anyone to stop in and talk to you if they want to know anything about the history of Aurora?
We'd like anybody to come in and chat.
That's great. I sure appreciate your time that the two of you spent today and sharing this episode of My Town, Indiana.
Glad to do it.
Thank you very much. See you next time on My Town, Indiana.